The Second Crusade stands as a testament to the interplay of religious fervor, political intrigue, and military ambition that characterized the medieval period. Launched in response to the fall of the County of Edessa to Muslim forces, this crusade was marked by the mobilization of the mightiest rulers of Christendom. Yet, despite its grand intentions and the significant resources committed, this crusade culminated in failure and disillusion. The campaign's outcomes not only deepened the rift between the European powers, but also between the Christian and Muslim worlds, setting the stage for future conflicts of the crusading era. Hello, welcome. If you're new to the channel, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it's great to have you again. If you'd like to support the channel, links to the Patreon are in the description and comments. Otherwise, a like, comment, and subscribe goes a very, very long way. Now, without further ado, let's begin our topic for today: a full history of the Second Crusade. Now, of course, if you've not watched my first Crusade video, perhaps it would be prudent of you to do so before you watch this one. There are some returning characters. Or if you just want to watch this one, let's get busy. Following the initial crusade and the subsequent minor crusade of 1101, the Crusaders established three principal states in the Levant, being the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa, with the County of Tripoli joining them later in 1109. Positioned furthest north and being the most vulnerable, Edessa had faced constant threats from neighboring Muslim territories, including the Danishmends, Ortokids, and especially the Seljuk Turks. Baldwin II of Edessa, later succeeded by Jocelyn of Courtenay, experienced capture alongside Jocelyn following the Battle of Haran in 1104, and both were captured again in 1122. Well, despite some recovery after the Battle of Azaz in 1125, Jocelyn was slain in combat in 1131. His heir, Jocelyn II, found a rather uneasy ally in the Byzantine Empire. But the deaths of John II Komnenos and Fulk of Anjou later in 1143 left Edessa without strong allies, further weakened by disputes with Tripoli and Antioch. Now over on the other side, Zengi, the Artabeg of Mosul, expanded his domain to include Aleppo in 1128, thereby positioning himself as a central figure in the Syrian power dynamic contested between Mosul and Damascus, the two largest cities at the time, albeit Damascus was quite a bit larger. The rivalry extended to Baldwin II of Jerusalem, who faced defeat near Damascus in 1129. Despite the Burid dynasty of Damascus forming an alliance with King Fulk against Zengi's sieges in 1139 and 1130, brokered by Usma ibn Munkid, Zengi maintained his influence. The fall of Edessa in the December of 1144 marked a significant turning point. Jocelyn's attempt to assist the Ortokids against Aleppo left Edessa completely open and vulnerable, and this allowed Zengi to move in and swiftly capture the city. despite reinforcements from Jerusalem that perhaps arrived a little bit too late, Edessa was lost, with Jocelyn II retreating to govern what remained of his holdings from Turbessel, a much smaller and less grand position. Now over time, it just got worse. The remaining lands of Edessa were either overtaken by Muslims or ceded to the Byzantines. That was the Eastern Roman Empire. Zengi, well, he was hailed as a hero in the Muslim world. Of course, he took back the old territories, didn't he? But he did not extend his campaign to Antioch or the remaining Edessan territories. And no wonder. Antioch had the highest walls in the region. It was incredibly difficult for the Crusaders to take that one, and they would not let that go without significant amounts of boiling water from the ramparts. Well, Zengi's return to Mosul and subsequent assassination in 1146 left the legacy to his son, Nur ad-Din, who continued his father's ambitions in Syria. Finally, the unsettling news of Edessa's capture managed to reach Europe through pilgrims and official messengers from Antioch, Jerusalem, and Armenia in the early 1145. Pope Eugene III was informed by Bishop Hugh of Jabala, leading to the issuance of the papal bull Quantum Predecessores in December 1145, which, of course, called for a brand shiny new crusade. Of course, the first one went quite well, albeit once they got over the few speed bumps, they managed to take a lot of territory. Another crusade, well, we just follow the old formula, right? Well, we shall see. Now, during his report, Hugh of Jabala also introduced the legend of Prester John, a mythical Eastern monarch believed to perhaps come to the Crusaders' aid. Apparently this Prester John was out there somewhere in the Middle East with this formidable Christian army, this crusader force of unmatched power that would show up. If you build it, they will come. That kind of situation. Now, operating from Viterbo, due to his lack of control over Europe, Pope Eugene aimed for the Second Crusade to be a more coordinated effort, with Europe's mightiest monarchs at the helm, and a prearranged path, marking a departure from the somewhat chaotic nature of the First Crusade. Once again, if you want to know how bad that was, just go and watch the First Crusade video. Bernard of Clairvaux, a French abbot, was tasked by the Pope personally to go around and promote this crusade, offering indulgences similar to those promised for the First Crusade, albeit if you come to the Holy Land, then your sins will be forgiven. And everyone was quite keen on signing up for this, which makes one tend to think that they must have been sinning to quite a degree. Well, at a gathering in Vézelay in 1146, Bernard's impassioned preaching persuaded King Louis VII of France and other nobles to take up the cross and join the crusade. His mission then continued in Germany, where miracles reported in his wake further bolstered the Crusade's goal. Citation needed on that one, I think. Either way, this led to Conrad III of Germany and his nephew Frederick Barbarossa to commit to the cause as well. Two very big names. So now you had Germany and France. That's a pretty good roster. The kind of people that you want on your team if you're marching halfway across the world to kick some heads in. Now, despite Bernard's fervent advocacy, the Crusade's call led to some rather unintended violence against Jews in the Rhineland, which was incited mainly by a zealous monk known only as Rudolph. Bernard, alongside Archbishops Arnold of Cologne and Henry Mainz, decided to intervene in this, condemning the violence and restoring peace. And you must remember, Jews were not Christians, right? And this was a war against the enemies of God. Well, non-Christians, enemies of God. Well, not a good time to be living in that area, let's just say. Now in 1147, the crusade expanded to the Iberian Peninsula, that's down near Spain, aligning with the Reconquista efforts against the Moors. This same year saw English crusaders assist at the Siege of Lisbon, that's in Portugal, aiding King Alonso of Portugal in capturing the city after a very prolonged and difficult siege. This engagement marked a notable instance of crusaders settling in conquered territories, influencing the region's Christian reconquest efforts. And simultaneously, forces under Alfonso VII of Leon and Count Raymond Berenguer IV targeted Almeria, leveraging naval support for a successful conquest. The Crusaders' efforts extended to Valencia and Murcia, with subsequent campaigns leading to the capture of Tortosa and other key locations, further embedding the Crusader presence in Iberia's martial and political landscape. Well, the Islamic areas during the time of the Crusades, their military was a rather formidable one, and it primarily consisted of very well-trained and very well-equipped ethnic Turkish professional soldiers. The core of this military might was sustained through a system named as the Ikta, which allocated land fiefs responsible for supporting a designated quota of soldiers. During conflicts, the urban-based Adath militias, who were predominantly Arab, supplemented the professional ranks under the leadership of the Rais, or city chief. Although these militias might not have matched the professional soldiers in training, their enthusiasm and fervor, often fueled by the concept of jihad, compensated for their lack of polished combat skills. Running off pure anger, it seems. You know what it's like. Now additionally, Turkoman and Kurdish auxiliary forces were mobilized during wars, as they were known for their fighting spirit, albeit sometimes lacking discipline. Now, Mu'in al-Din Anur, the Artabeg of Damascus from 1138 to 1149, emerged as a preeminent military and political figure of the era. While officially under the nominal rule of the Burid Amirs, Anur wielded actual control, notably for his military acumen and as a cultivator of the arts. Historians note that Anur's contributions to thwarting the Second Crusade were overshadowed by subsequent political shifts that favored the Zengids dynasty, which regulated his achievements to the background of the historical narrative. It seems the Zengids were rather taking credit for the group project. Now back to the crusading armies. The crusading armies displayed a diverse tactical preference, with French knights showing a predilection for cavalry maneuvers, excelling in speed and coordination, while their German counterparts showed a stronger inclination towards infantry engagements, demonstrating superior skill in swordsmanship. Tactical diversity underscored the varied martial traditions within the crusading forces, and when you think about it, does it not seem so culturally French to be mounted, being all fancy, and so culturally German just to run in and start stabbing with a sword? I think so. Well, to the leadership of the crusade, we saw figures like Conrad III, who was praised for his valor, yet critiqued for hesitancy in critical juncture. And of course, Louis VII, whose piety and affection for his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, sometimes drew criticism from his contemporaries for perceived distractions from martial and political pursuits. England's King Stephen actually abstained from joining the crusade, since he was preoccupied with a good amount of domestic strife. And King David I of Scotland was somewhat similarly deterred from the crusade, illustrating the complex web of social considerations that influenced the different areas of the time. Now, back to Jocelyn II. Edessa was gone, and everybody wanted it back. That was the whole cause of this mission, the whole cause of this new crusade, to retake Edessa. So Jocelyn, in a bold move, managed to recapture it, and he laid siege to its fortress following the assassination of Zengi. But his triumph was very short-lived, as Nur ad-Din emerged victorious in a further clash of November 1146. Well, the planning of the French crusaders took a crucial turn during a meeting at Etampes on the 16th of February 1147, when discussions centered on the choice of route to the Holy Land. Now, the Germans favored an overland journey through Hungary, citing political tensions with Roger II of Sicily as a deterrent to a maritime approach. Well, of course, the French nobility found themselves at somewhat of a crossroads, wary of traversing the Byzantine Empire due to lingering mistrust from the experiences of the First Crusade, still had a poor taste in their mouth from that one, especially because of Alexios Komnenos. Not very reliable. Ultimately, the decision was made to align with Conrad's overland strategy, setting a departure date of the 15th of June, despite Roger II's consequent withdrawal from the crusade. Now, back in France, the absence of the king on crusade prompted the selection of Abbot Suger as regent, a decision sanctioned by the Pope, and made during the significant Council of Etampes. Meanwhile, the German contingent saw Adam of Ebrach and Otto of Friesling championing the crusading cause, with departure delays pushing their start from Easter to May, marking a period of preparation and intense anticipation across the crusading nations. Everybody was very keen to get going at this point. The Second Crusade's German contingent, under Conrad III and the guidance of Cardinal Theodwin, aimed for a rendezvous with the French in Constantinople. Joining forces with Ottokar III of Styria, not Syria, Styria, in Vienna, they gained safe passage through Hungary, courtesy of Geza II. However, upon entering the lands of the Byzantines, tensions began to flare up. Skirmishes broke out near Philippopolis and Adrianople, pitting the Germans against the Byzantine forces led by General Prosok, including an encounter with Frederick Barbarossa himself. Well, misfortune struck when floods claimed German lives in early September, and by the 10th of September, the Germans finally reached Constantinople, facing a strained relationship with Emperor Manuel I Komnenos. Manuel's request for German troops to defend against Roger II's raid in Greece was rebuffed by Conrad. Can't blame them for not being in the mood. In Asia Minor, Conrad pressed forward towards Iconium, not bothering to wait for the French. His forces were divided, with knights and elite troops marching overland, and the remainder, who were led under Bishop Otto of Friesling, taking a route down the coast. This journey proved very perilous, as the region was largely under Turkish control, contradicting Conrad's expectations of Byzantine authority. On October the 25th, 1147, the Seljuk Turks met Conrad's forces in battle and decimated them at the Second Battle of Dorylaeum. The Germans then faced relentless Turkish assaults during their retreat to Constantinople, with Conrad sustaining a few rather serious injuries. Meanwhile, Otto's contingent also suffered a catastrophic defeat near Laodicea in the November of 1147. This series of setbacks made things a lot more perilous for the Crusaders' journey, and certainly more than a few eyebrows were raised among the leadership. How could it possibly be going so wrong? Departing from Metz in June 1147, the French contingent of the Second Crusade, under the leadership of King Louis VII, embarked on their journey toward the Holy Land. Accompanied by notable figures such as Thierry of Alsace, Renaud I of Bar, and Amadeus III of Savoy, among others from various French regions, including Lorraine, Brittany, Burgundy, and Aquitaine, they charted a course similar to that of the Germans. In contrast, Alphonse of Toulouse and his Provençal force opted for a maritime route, delaying their departure until August. The French ranks swelled with crusaders from Normandy and England who met at Worms, but faced tensions with King Geza of Hungary over the inclusion of Boris Kalamos, a Hungarian pretender king, in their ranks. Now this friction was just indicative of the uneasy passage through territories that remembered the First Crusade's less savory actions. The French, upon entering Byzantine lands, encountered a changed political landscape. Emperor Manuel Komnenos had opted for a strategic truce with the Seljuk Sultan Mesud I, redirecting his focus towards the potentially treacherous crusaders, who had in the past exhibited a propensity for looting and a possible interest in Constantinople itself. Well, despite this backdrop of suspicion, and the recent memory of the Crusades, the First Crusades rather, excesses, the French were somewhat well received, with an even more surprising degree of hospitality in Constantinople. However, this warm welcome did not completely assuage the tensions, as some French crusaders voiced their dissatisfaction with Manuel's truce with the Seljuks and proposed a bold, if not reckless, alliance with Roger III to attack Constantinople itself. King Louis VII, prioritizing the pilgrimage's sanctity and strategic coherence over internal dissent, managed to keep such radical propositions at bay, emphasizing the precarious balance between crusading zeal and political pragmatism. Now, upon their assembly in Constantinople, the crusader forces from Auvergne, Savoy, and Montferrat, having journeyed all the way overland from Italy through Brindisi to Durazzo, embarked on ships to cross the Bosphorus into Asia Minor. Despite the optimistic rumors of German successes at Iconium, Emperor Manuel Komnenos withheld military support from the Byzantines, citing the need to defend against Roger II of Sicily's incursions into the Peloponnese. Thus, unlike their predecessors in the First Crusade, the French and the Germans ventured into Asia Minor without local assistance. In adherence to a precedent established by his grandfather Alexios, Manuel secured an oath from the French that any reconquered territories would be immediately restored to the Byzantine Empire. While the French contingent, now bolstered by the remnants of Conrad III's forces, advanced towards the Mediterranean coast, aiming for their goal, Ephesus. Despite receiving admonishments from Byzantine envoys regarding the pillaging conducted by Louis's troops, and the looming threat of further Turkic aggression, the Crusaders continued to press on. The anticipation of a Turkish assault began to materialize at the Battle of Ephesus, where the French managed to emerge victorious on Christmas Eve of 1147. This triumph was soon followed by another battle of the Meander. Things seem to be turning around. The battle is turning in our favor. However, the Crusades' momentum faltered upon reaching Laodicea in the early January of 1148, as the vanguard, led by Amadeus of Savoy, were ambushed at the Battle of Mont Cadmus, resulting in significant losses. In a perilous situation, King Louis VII found himself evading Turkish detection. The continuous harassment by Turkish forces and the scorched earth strategy they employed compelled Louis to abandon the overland route in favor of a naval passage to Antioch from Adalia. However, things did not go to plan, and it was thwarted by a delay in the arrival of the promised naval support, forcing the majority of the Crusaders to undertake a grueling march to Antioch. This journey decimated the ranks through combat losses from ambushes and disease, and it very nearly obliterated the entire army. Upon his arrival in Antioch on March 19th, Louis was greeted warmly by Raymond of Poitiers, Eleanor's uncle. Raymond harbored hopes that Louis would aid in the defense against the Turks and join a campaign against Aleppo, a strategic city on the route to Edessa. However, Louis opted to continue his pilgrimage to Jerusalem rather than engage in further military endeavors. Eleanor found pleasure in her stay at Antioch, yet faced pressure from Raymond to stay put and help expand their familial territory. He even went so far to suggest divorce if he refused to commit to the Crusade's military objectives. Amidst this, rumors surfaced of a romantic entanglement between Eleanor and Raymond. Ooh, this is getting good. Well, they were most likely just rumors. Perhaps even made up by some forces from the other side to stir up some infighting. Either way, the rumors, whether true or not, strained her marriage with Louis. In response, Louis departed for Antioch for Tripoli, placing Eleanor under arrest. Very juicy. In the meantime, Otto of Friesling and the remnants of his force reached Jerusalem in early April, with Conrad arriving shortly afterward. They were joined by forces that had previously aided Lisbon and Provençal crusaders led by Alfonso Jordan of Toulouse. Tragically, Alfonso died under suspicious circumstances at Caesarea, believed to have been poisoned by Raymond of Tripoli, who had harbored some fears about Alfonso's political ambitions. This accusation led many Provençal crusaders to abandon their journey and simply go home. Although the crusade initially aimed to recapture Edessa, King Baldwin III and the Knights Templar now set their sights on Damascus. I mean, they'd came this far. May as well go for the big prize. The regent of Damascus, Mu'in ad-Din Unur, alarmed by the Crusaders' approach, fortified the city, mustered troops, and sabotaged water sources along the route to Damascus. He also sought aid from the Zangid rulers of Aleppo and Mosul, who were usually, in more normal times, his adversaries. Of course, despite their historic rivalry, the imminent threat of a Crusader siege prompted these calls for assistance. However, their forces would not arrive in time to participate in the defense of Damascus. This delay likely stemmed from a desire to see Unur weakened by the Crusader threat, but we're not too sure about that. But it certainly seems very likely that they would let the Crusaders soften him up and then go in for the kill. Now the nobles of Jerusalem were enthusiastic about the influx of European forces, It's good to finally see some friendly faces around here. A significant assembly occurred on the 24th of June, 1148, near Acre at a town called Palmyra, where the Jerusalem haute cour convened with the newly arrived European crusaders, and they certainly made a big event of it. It was a celebration. Perhaps they were all celebrating a little bit too early, thinking that, well, now we are all here, the victory and the glory is only around the corner. The assembly ultimately resolved to launch an all-out assault on Damascus. Previously allied with Jerusalem, Damascus had veered towards an alliance with the Zengids, and had even attacked Bosra, an ally of Jerusalem, in 1147. The choice to target Damascus rather than Edessa has been critiqued by historians as a pretty grave strategic error, given the strained relations between the Unur of Damascus and the Zengids' emerging dominance. However, some modern scholars argue the opposite, arguing that targeting Damascus was tactically sound. Either way, the reason that Damascus, being southern Syria's most formidable Muslim state, would be better positioned the Crusaders against Nur ad-Din's ascendancy. With Unur being the weaker link compared to Nur ad-Din, there was a prevailing belief that Nur ad-Din's takeover of Damascus was imminent. Therefore, it seemed strategically advantageous for the Crusaders to control Damascus before the Zengids could. In July, the crusading forces, numbering around 50,000, congregated at Tiberias before embarking towards Damascus, circling the Sea of Galilee via Banias. The Crusaders opted to launch their attack on Damascus from the west, drawn by the prospect of abundant supplies from the orchards. They reached Daraya on July 23rd, but by the next day they faced fierce resistance from the defenders, who launched relentless attacks on the Crusaders advancing through the orchards. Assistance for Damascus came from Saif ad-Din Ghazi I of Mosul and Nur ad-Din of Aleppo, the latter leading a direct assault on the Crusader encampment. Now this forced the Crusaders to retreat from the city walls back into the orchards, leaving them vulnerable to guerrilla tactics and ambushes. William of Tyre noted that on July 27th, the Crusaders made a strategic retreat into the city's eastern plains, an area with fewer defenses and scarcer resources. Rumors circulated that Unur had enticed the Crusader leaders into this disadvantageous move with bribes, promising to sever ties with Nur ad-Din should the Crusaders withdraw. However, the arrival of Nur ad-Din and Saif ad-Din on the battlefield made it untenable for the Crusaders to reclaim their initial positions. Faced with the unyielding stance of the local Crusader lords against continuing the siege, the kings had no alternative but to give up on Damascus. Conrad was the first to withdraw, and the rest of the forces followed suit on July the 28th, retreating towards Jerusalem under the persistent harassment of Turkish archers who constantly shadowed their march. Well, the failed siege planted the seeds of mistrust among the Crusader forces and led to a breakdown in cooperative efforts. Conrad's move to Ascalon, though intended as a new strategic plan, floundered as further support was withheld, a direct consequence of the burgeoning mistrust. And this failure not only sustained mutual suspicion among the Christian factions for generations, but also marked the beginning of the decline of Christian strongholds in the Holy Land. Conrad eventually sought to strengthen Western ties with Emperor Manuel in Constantinople, while Louis extended his stay in Jerusalem until 1149. The crusade also took a personal toll on Louis and Eleanor's marriage, which deteriorated to the point of the constant silent treatment, apparently. What a terrible fate. Perhaps the biggest tragedy of the Second Crusade. Well, their return to France was apparently in separate transports. Rather telling, isn't it? Bernard of Clairvaux, who had championed the crusade with fervent zeal, faced profound humiliation over its defeat. It was universally seen as a complete waste of time. Compelled by a sense of responsibility, Bernard drafted a written apology to the Pope, elaborating on his views in the second part of his Book of Consideration, attributing to the Crusade's failure to the sins of its participants. That's right, it wasn't his fault. It was because everybody was too busy thinking the wrong thoughts. And that's why they lost. More than a little bit of a cop-out, if you ask me. Well, despite his efforts to initiate another crusade, he eventually and rather wisely distanced himself from the debacle. Bernard passed away in 1153, leaving behind a legacy intertwined with the Crusade's ambitions and its subsequent despair. And just imagine it, if you were told originally by Bernard of Clairvaux that you, sir, should go on the crusade. And you did, walking half away across the world, hoping that your sins would be forgiven. And then you watch your commanders make the silliest decisions they can, infight with each other, and ultimately the whole thing falls apart, only to have the finger pointed squarely back at you by the person who convinced you to go on this fruitless endeavor in the first place. Make up your own mind on how popular Bernard of Clairvaux was in the wake of his death. Of course, the Second Crusade left a lasting mark on French culture, particularly through the intrigue surrounding Eleanor and Raymond, which captivated many troubadours and fueled the romantic notion of courtly love. Despite Conrad's tarnished reputation, Louis emerged with an enhanced image of France, revered as a devout pilgrim who endured divine retribution with a great amount of grace. However, the Crusades severely strained relations between the French and the Byzantine Empire. Accusations from Louis and other French leaders against Manuel, alleging his conspiracy with the Turks against crusading forces, well, this certainly soured Franco-Byzantine relations for many decades to come. Within the Byzantine Empire, the Crusade was remembered not for military engagement, but as a victory for strategic diplomacy, celebrating Manuel's adeptness in navigating and manipulating complex political landscapes for the empire's benefit, as lauded by Archbishop Eustathius of Thessalonica in his eulogy for Manuel. Of course, it's rather easy for Manuel to feel this way, as he was not the one marching down to Antioch. Well, very easy when you're sitting in your nice, comfortable little palace to say, well, that crusade wasn't that bad. Now, the aftermath cast a long shadow over the Christian kingdoms in the East, ushering a period of heightened strife and political turmoil. At the death of the Atabeg of Anur in 1149, well, that ignited yet another political struggle within Damascus, with the military leader Mu'ayyad al-Dawal ibn al-Sufi commanding the Adath militias, demanding a greater share of authority due to his role in stopping the Second Crusade. This internal conflict signaled the decline of the Burid state, as Damascus grew increasingly distrustful of the Crusader states, culminating in its capture by Nur ad-Din in 1154. Now, the capture of Ascalon by Baldwin III in 1153 only escalated this conflict, drawing Egypt into the fray and marking a brief period during the 1160s when Jerusalem made inroads into Egyptian territory. But all in all, despite these gains, the failure of a joint invasion of Egypt with the Byzantines in 1169, alongside dwindling European reinforcements, and a fractured Byzantine alliance, just weakened Jerusalem's position even further. And of course, it wasn't over yet. The rise of the great Saladin in 1171 as Sultan of Egypt, uniting the land of Egypt and Syria against the Crusader states, along with the subsequent fall of Jerusalem in 1187 to his forces, underscored the dire consequences of the Second Crusade. This precipitated the call for the Third Crusade, as the Crusader states faced an existential threat from the consolidated forces of Saladin. But of course, that's for the Third Crusade video. Just how many crusades will they have? Well, if you keep watching the videos, you'll find out, won't you? I would like to thank my Mega Chat tier patrons, JC and Stark Factory, for their contribution. If you'd like to support the channel, follow the links to the Patreon, or just leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That helps a lot too. For now, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again for listening. All the best. Good night.